Hi everybody, I'm Kerry Cunningham. I'm a former Serious Decisions and Forrester analyst. I currently head up research and thought leadership at Sixth Sense, and I'm your host for the Science of B2B podcast, which is the one you're listening to or watching right now. Now, today's episode is entitled When Atoms Were Really Atoms. We're going to dig into that in just a minute. But before we start, I want to thank you for tuning in again if you've been watching earlier episodes or listening to them of the podcast. And if not, welcome. Thanks for joining. And please do have a look at earlier episodes, especially the first one that explains a bit about what we're doing here at the Science of B2B. All right, this week's episode I'm really excited about, so let's get right into it. Here's something that we all know. We know what the atom is, right? We all know kind of what it is. Maybe not. The word atom is from the Greek for indivisible. And when John Dalton used the term to say that all the stuff in the world was made up of atoms, he thought atoms were the smallest clump of matter that was indivisible, couldn't break it apart. As is so often the case with established scientific facts, more or less, we all know that atoms are not indivisible. But Dalton got a lot of things right. He thought that there were many different kinds of atoms and that the stuff we interact with in the world was a combination of these various atoms. That part was genius. And given the time frame, 1803, you can forgive him for not knowing the rest of it yet. Now, much later, another fella, J.J. Thompson, had the idea of negatively charged electrons swimming around in a positively charged stew, just electrons though, in a stew. There wasn't much else. That wasn't quite right, but it was getting there. And already the atom was no longer atomic. And from there, the good stuff came thick and fast. And as it came, it started to explain why some atoms behave differently than others, and it did it better and better. In 1911, Ernest Rutherford did a very clever experiment to deduce that atoms were mostly empty space and had to have a positive something or another at the center, with the negatively charged electrons orbiting around it. So that started to explain a little bit more of how it actually worked. 2 years after that, Niels Bohr figured out that the orbit of electrons wasn't random or intersecting, but had defined orbits. Then in 1926, Erwin Schrödinger blew everyone's mind by showing that electrons didn't really have or move in orbits, but can only be said to have a probability of being anywhere around a nucleus at any given time. It's also when a lot of the quantum hoo-ha started. Now, in 1932, one of Rutherford's former students discovered the neutron, which was needed to explain the weight of an atom. A decade and a half later, splittability of atoms and the accuracy of atomic theory was confirmed in the most dramatic way imaginable when we first tested and then used nuclear weapons. Now, much more cheerily, virtually every electronic device we have demonstrates that these ideas are true. But if someone listening to this podcast wants to come on and fill me in on the rest, that'd be great. All right, so much later in the 1960s, we got the whimsically named subatomic particles, quarks, which make up hadrons, which are the category name for neutrons and protons. Each revision of atomic theory took hold because it explained the behavior of atoms and all of the things that made up atoms better in the real world. Each incremental change solved a problem or a set of problems left open by the existing explanation. And that's how science works. For the most part, if you enter science, you enter hoping and determined to contribute something new to your chosen field. And that's always going to be, or nearly always going to be, by superseding the work of those who came before you, even when those people are your mentors and friends. But scientists also know that even when they do supersede those who came before, the people who come after them are ultimately going to do the same thing. That is truly the nature of the game. Now, we should be looking at B2B the same way. Now, I'm often very harsh when I talk about MQL-based demand gen and ABM. To some extent, that's because when an idea is as deeply entrenched as leads are, you have to really go at it to get people's attention. And in this case, the idea of the lead and how it is treated in B2B is not even approximately right. It's not even in the same neighborhood as right. And getting people to consider a new alternative is not easy. That kind of change is not inherent in our B2B cultures. It should be. As in science, we need to embrace the fact that we may have an innovation or an idea, process change, technology change that ultimately changes how we need to see our jobs. Even if it's just a subtle change, we need to be on the lookout for them and embrace that change. Now, inbound leads did exactly that about 15 or so years ago. Leads and all of the machinery built around it added a really important and great capability to B2B businesses. I'm definitely old enough to remember when there essentially were no leads, or when they came in the form of postcards that trade pub readers would fill out and send in. Most of you don't know what I'm talking about. Leads represented a massive, awesome change. So awesome, in fact, that hardly anyone resisted it or, unfortunately, really thought very deeply about what we ought to do with them. But MQLs and points-based lead scoring were never the right answer to how to prioritize those leads. And in my opinion, that did more harm than good. But an industry and many thousands of careers have been built on the back of that innovation. ABM was an attempt to correct some of the flaws. And it is definitely a step in the right direction. But it is and was very far from a final step, because it uses all the same machinery that was built for marketing automation. It was built for leads. Now, the key benefits of ABM are that organizations align across marketing and sales on the set of accounts they want to prioritize. That's a very good thing. And also very good is that organizations become much more thoughtful in how they enable buyers and enable salespeople in an ABM model. Content for both sales and buyers is generally much more thoughtfully planned and prepared. So that's great. But in my view, ABM focused far too much on the job of creating demand and not enough on the job of recognizing when that demand was being expressed. If you're going to invest more heavily in marketing to a specific set of accounts, what's that going to look like if it works? Now, I have asked that simple question to dozens, really hundreds of marketers over the last 5 or 6 years. And marketers generally go directly to pipeline. Yeah, more pipeline, we'll get more pipeline. Well, yes, that would be great. But that generally takes a while. So how about early on? And the answer is, you're going to get lots of anonymous traffic from those organizations and probably more leads, maybe more MQLs. So as I've harped on in prior episodes, if you aren't doing everything you can legally to de-anonymize your web traffic, you're very close to malpractice there now. And what we really want to do is have a completely different approach. One that accounts for all of the signals B2B buying groups emit as they go to market to identify solutions. And the solutions exist. Now, to be sure, my company has one, and I think it's the best. There are others. Here's what the approach looks like if you do it the way that I'm talking about. And I like to think of this as the atomic model of B2B revenue opportunities. So what you would see is that you have sometimes your MQL right in the center, right in the nucleus of that atom. And if you have that, then there would be at least a couple, if not more, non-MQLs from the same company. And then there would be a dozen or so or more unique anonymous visitors from that same organization. And then the signals from that same buying committee, from their research in other places that you would detect through third-party intent, would absolutely swamp the signals that you have on your own website in almost all circumstances. If you're focused on that little thing in the nucleus of the opportunity atom, you now know that you are missing almost all of the signals that are available. Now, next time, we'll get a little more operational, and I'll take on that double funnel concept. We'll look at why some people think it's a good idea, and of course, you'll get my 2 cents. Thanks everybody for tuning in, really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.